What is up, Scrub fam? Pat here, back with my boy, Mr. Tadakichi, to talk about the yellow cards from Draft Box 5. This is the yellow cards, obviously, for our limited review. Before I jump into it, guys, if you missed any of the previous parts, links, as always, will be down in the description down below. Also, if you are looking for sealed product or have not purchased Draft Box 5 sealed product, one, what are you doing? And two, check out Alec Pastrana over at beardedcollectibles.com. He's going to hook you guys up with the best prices on sealed product. So with that little intro out of the way, let us just jump right into talking about the cards. So we are going to be talking about the yellow cards, obviously, today. The blue and green, obviously, were very, very strong. Yellow is very strange to me because yellow's archetype is something that is really busted and powerful in constructed, and it should be broken and limited, but looking at the sheer number of 0-5K combos and the lack of extra cards in this format, I actually think yellow is pretty middle of the road in terms of what it does. It's trying to tap your opponent out, and if your opponent's deck is constructed in such a way that you can take advantage of that, great. Otherwise, I think yellow is just a very so-so color. I would prioritize blue and green, I think, higher in draft, but I do think that you can make it work, and there are some very powerful cards in this color, such as this Cava here, who is a 2-cost 20K, and you guys know how much I love those just because they're overstated at the common rarity, so you're going to have a lot of these, so Cava gets an 8 from me. Next up is Cava Saiyan Invigoration is a 3-cost 15K, which is a rate. You're paying 2 yellow, and you can place this card from your hand into the drop area. Choose one of your opponent's battle cards, negate skills for the turn, then choose it to one of your yellow battle cards with an energy cost of 2 or less, and switch it to active mode. So basically, you're paying 2 to restand one of your guys that costs 2 or less, and then also, basically negate a blocker. So it's really situational. It is an uncommon, so it's a singleton. I would say Cava is probably somewhere around a 5 for me. I would be okay to have one of these in my deck. I probably really wouldn't want to have more than that, though. It has nice utility, and it's fair stats for its actual hard casting cost, but not something I'm super enthusiastic about playing. I'd rather, for the cost of 2, by the way, just get another body on board. Next up is Khalifa Saiyan Invalidation. Appropriate name for a negate. It is a 2-cost 15K with a negate, and that alone, regardless of any other effects, is going to get you an 8, just like it does with some of the other cards that we've done in this cycle. It seems every color seems to have a 2-cost 15K negate. It is good tempo and good at protecting your life, and then obviously it can 2-for-1 your opponent because you can negate like a leader swing and tap down a 3-drop. So Khalifa just has great value at the uncommon rarity, and if you're already in the yellow slot, definitely consider picking her up as one of the second or third picks in a pack. Next up is a 10K Vanilla Khalifa. This is going to be about about a 4 from me, just like I do with all the other 10K skillless in this draft box review. It's closer somewhere to like a 5 or a 6 if you are pairing it with red and you're in the skillless theme. I think it's largely its purpose, but otherwise you can basically just skip this Khalifa and only really play it if you are short on playables. Next up is Kale, Uncontrollable Rage. 4-cost 20K with critical and dual attack is excellent keywords. Deflect is, largely irrelevant. It can be helpful against some of the super rares and things like that in the set that are extra cards. But for the most part, this is just a solid beater for turn 4 and onward. So I'm going to give Kale a low 8 to a high 7 just because she has good keywords, even though it doesn't seem like she's that impressive. You'd be surprised how much damage and how many cards that this card will actually chew through your opponent. And while she doesn't win the game, she will basically grind your opponent out if left unanswered for 2 or 3 turns. Next up is Kale the Mischievous. 3-cost 20K is actually a pretty good stat line for 3. When you play it, choose one of your opponent's battle cards or energy and switch it to rest mode. I feel like most of the time this is just going to be a 3-cost 20K vanilla. Tapping your opponent's energy, again, there's very few extra cards that super matter aside from some negates. So like you will be able to say stop one of these negates like this Khalifa, say an Invalidation. I guess that's her best use, but for the most part it's largely just going to be a 3-cost 20K. It's barely, I feel like, an inconvenience. You'll notice that a lot of cards, just look as we go through this review how many 0-5Ks there are, and go back and watch previous videos and realize how many 0-5Ks there are. So tapping your opponent out basically can stifle a game-winning negate, but over the course of the game, tapping one energy here, one energy there is nowhere near as detrimental as it is in Constructed, where we are trying to hold up counterplays and answers to big bombs. Big bombs are far less common in this format, and there wasn't that many answers to begin with anyway, so it just feels like overkill and a lot of does nothing on a lot of these effects. So yeah, for that reason I'm going to give Kale a 7, and that's largely again because of her stat line for 3. Next up is Hit the Revoker, which in my opinion is the most overrated card in Constructed for this entire format, or I should say set. It's a 3-cost 15k with a counterplay. Choose 2 of your opponent's energy to switch them to rest mode, then play this card. So you're basically paying 3 energy to tap your opponent down 2 energy and put a body on board. In draft, think about it. If you had 3 energy, wouldn't you rather just play a beater and attack? It doesn't negate an attack. If your opponent already has guys in play and you're playing the yellow mirror, they can play some of the other cards that are in this theme and tap you out before you can play this, in which case your whole point of playing this card is basically, moot. And even in Constructed, again, I just feel like there's a million ways to play around this. Like, you're paying 3 to tap your opponent 2. That's like a really terrible resource trait, and all you're getting out of it is a 1-cost 15k basically. Hit isn't really, again, much better in Limited. You want to be the aggressor in Limited. Playing a control style of deck is very difficult unless you have a lot of high-end rarities or got very lucky. And even then, I think that this is one of the worst counterplays you could be playing. I would rather play some of the super rare ones, such as Hit, Deadly Vanguard. I really just don't think that this card is that good, and honestly, it feels like a trap. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 4. There might be some niche scenarios where you could side it in our matchups against decks where they manage to draft like several negates or a lot of these, like, again, these 2-cost Saiyan Invalidation Khalifas, or the other ones from the other colors, such as the blue uncommon. So I think that that's the main reason to use it. But otherwise, I think this card is a trap, and I really don't think that you should be drafting it. Next up is Raw Power Botamo. It's a 2-cost 15k, which is good stat line, and it has Revenge, which means that your opponent has to spend premium removal on this, or they have to actually attack it with their leader to get rid of it. It's still pretty easy to remove, but it does have the nice upside of it trades with your opponent. So I'm going to give Botamo a high 7. I think this is a very good common, and I think you should be snapping up as many of these as you can, along with the 2-drop Cava. Next up, we have Metal Volley Magetta. It's 2-cost 10k draw card. We've had this card a million times before. 2-cost 10k is not where we want to be, especially when you consider many of the higher stat lines on 2-drops in this set. It does replace itself, but the thing is we want cantrips on 1, not on 2. Still, Magetta is a decent addition to any of your decks if you need a filler card, because he will help you find other cards quicker, and he will replace himself when you do combo him off to protect yourself from a leader critical swing. So for that reason, Magetta gets a 5 for me. He is a playable card that you can definitely pick up. Next up is EA, or EA, I guess. Dignified Supremacy, I'm not really sure how you pronounce that. It is a 3-cost 15k, which is, again, rate. And again, tapping your opponent energy is not super great in my opinion. So, you're going to basically be comboing this card away, and you'll be able to use it to tap your opponent out when going for a game-winning play. But yeah, I'm not like super enthusiastic about this, especially as a rare. This feels like largely like a dud rare. I'm going to give it a 4. I do really think that there are a lot of other cards I would rather be playing over this card. 3 costs for a 15k is the, most likely scenario for his usage, or like the most useful scenario for him. Does not inspire confidence. I feel like this activate main is going to happen few and far between. This is definitely a constructed card. Next up is Bergamo Ferocious Roar. This is one of the headliners of the set, one of the ones that I'm sure you guys are really excited about. Doggos are a major constructed archetype coming out of the set, and this is a very expensive card. And I wouldn't fault you for money drafting this if you actually attended a physical draft, or you were like indoors drafting a box with friends that you know are safe. So yeah, I definitely could see Bergamo being something that people would snap because it's money. That said, when it comes to draft, I think that this is a very mediocre card. It is good because of the fact that you can get a 2-cost 20k. That is the upside. And you can tap out your opponent or tap 2 of their guys defensively if you have the right cards. There are a couple of extra cards that will allow you to pull this off. It's a pretty expensive combo, but paying 5 for 20 is not super great, and you'd have to have a decent chunk of cards that will actually allow you to tap your opponent out. And even then, you're just getting a 20k vanilla. Like, basically bare minimum to be able to get this guy on board is like 4 for most of the time, or already have something in play such as Robe or one of these other cards that we'll talk about later. So there are situations where you can get him as a 2 for 20 and that's his ceiling. But for the most part, when you really think about this card, it's just a 2-drop combo with a lot of extra steps in draft. It's not really this like insane SR as compared to some of the other cards. So for that reason, I'm going to give this Bergamo a low 6, or I should say a high 6 to a low 7. It is worth playing if you have the setup for it and you are in heavy yellow, but this is definitely a constructed all-star, or a much better constructed card than it is a draft card. Next up is Bergamo Lupine Predator. which is a much more exciting Bergamo, I think, to open in your packs when you are trying to win a draft tournament or a sealed tournament. So he's a 7 cost, 25k triple attack with barrier. He becomes a 4-drop if your opponent has all of their energy in rest mode, which is not hard to do with the fact that most people are playing tap out style decks in draft box because there's no reason to really hold up energy. There's very few 10Ks, very few extra cards to be holding on to. And then also the fact that yellow does have some supplementary ways to help you accomplish this. If your opponent's not actually like fully tapping out every turn, then that's already a victory for you. But if you do, they do tap out, you get to play this guy who has the ability to choose all of your opponent's battle cards when you play him, ignoring barriers, switch them to rest mode, and they can't be switched to active mode until the start of your next main phase. So this is basically a sleep effect from Magic, and it's very powerful and limited and can win you the game because it basically taps down all the blockers, and it makes it so your opponent can't really mount a strong counterattack, which is really powerful. And again, 25 is a pretty sizable body with 3 attacks on top of that and barrier, so he's hard to get rid of. So you could swing twice and leave him in active mode and know that unless your opponent has like a very hard to get rare or super rare, this guy's basically going to keep living. Really strong rare for draft, and if you build around it properly, he should lead you to a lot of victory. So I'm going to give this Bergamo an 8. Next up is, again, another significantly better Bergamo than the constructed all-star that everybody is pining over in this set. So this is Gigantic Crusher Bergamo. This is a 3-cost 20k blocker barrier. During your opponent's turn, this card gets plus 10k power. So basically, if you guys played Draft Box 4 a lot, this is Shun Shun. It's just color locked to yellow now. Shun Shun was absurd in Draft Box 4. And I think in my original reviews, I only gave it like a 7, maybe an 8. Honestly, that card should have been closer to like an 8 or a 9 because it completely just dominates games and can just stall out, you know, against almost every type of deck that you could build in Draft Box 4. And they basically needed super rare muscle to actually get her off the board. And this card is very much the same way. For an uncommon, this card is fantastic. It's so difficult to get rid of. They basically, if they're not going to spend premium removal on this card is going to wall for days. It walls a lot of the rares in the set. It walls critical leader swings early. It just preserves your life total, and it's just huge. And knowing that it's got barrier on top of it, like, it's going to live. It's going to be around for a very long time. And I wouldn't surprise me if this is one of the best uncommons in the entire set when all is said and done and we've really explored the draft format. So for that reason, I'm going to give this Bergamo a 9. I think he's absolutely insane. He's just so difficult. If you just drop this guy on 3 and then drop another one on 4, which again, unlikely because of the uncommon tag, but if you do manage to get it going, unless your opponent is playing like super rare Rebrand or something insane, or they have like the 4-drop Rebrand, this card is living and it's protecting your life total and allowing you to set up game-winning plays. So for that reason, I have to give it such a high grade. Next up is Basil, Fatal Rampage. It is a 1-cost 4K. You can only have 1 in play, but that's fine because it's a super rare. So if you're all drafting correctly and within pods, within 1 box, you will never see more than 1 copy of this card. When you play it, it already cantrips, so already it's excellent, even as a turn 1 play, to be able to basically sack it off to protect your life total from a crit swing, which is what we want in a 1-drop. It just has the upside of, if your opponent has 5 or more cards in rest mode, he becomes a 19k dual attack until the start of your next turn. So that means that this card actually becomes a 3-drop Cava from Draft Box 4, and that card was already really nuts in my opinion, and was one of the best commons in the entire set, and you would want to draft multiples. So this is just that card with upside. So for that reason, with this Basil an 8, he's just really good all around. Next up is another Basil, the Impervious. He is a 3-cost 15k barrier deflect. When he attacks, he taps down one of your opponent's energy. Again, not super in love with this. 3-cost 15k is a meh rate, but it does have barrier, which is pretty nice. But again, I think there are better tap down effects that on significantly cheaper bodies that I would rather play. So for that reason, I'm going to give this Basil either a high 6 to a low 7. Somewhere around there. Like, it is a playable card and you will like it, but it's not as good as some of the 2-drops I think that we will talk about later. Next up is another Lavender, Venomous Fist. 4-cost 19k is but it does have blocker and barrier, which is kind of nice when it comes into play. Or I should say, it's an activate main. Once per game, you basically have to choose 2 of your opponent's energy and switch them to rest mode. Can be good for ending a game. I'm not really quite sure what to make of this card because 4 cost for a 19k blocker feels very meh. I wish this card had Revenge, and the situational tap 2 down can be good, but there are so many other commons and uncommons that are better at tapping than this guy and come down earlier than this guy, and will probably already be on board by the time you can play this guy. Its purpose seems like it's meant to set up either a Bergamo, like the 5-drop, or the 7-drop that we talked about. Obviously, it's a dog, so that's what it probably should do. But I just feel like this is a very niche effect, and I don't think you'll be using it very often. It still does have blockers, so that accounts for something. I'm going to give the Lavender a 5. I think it is a playable card, but it just feels too unwieldy and too difficult to set it up correctly. Next up is another Lavender Universe 9 agent. One costs 5k. You have to discard a Universe 9 card from your hand when you play him to KO one of your opponent's 4 or less cards in rest mode. It is removal, it's just really expensive. And again, we keep talking about how hand sizes are low in this video series because both leaders have critical on the front side. So I really don't want to be using this. Even like turn 3 using this feels pretty mediocre. It does have some niche uses. I mean, it's removal, so I'm going to give it a 5, but I just really don't like paying 2 cards from my hand to basically get such a very specific, like a 4 or less that's in rest mode. That feels oddly specific just for, you know, this type of effect. Next up is Comfrey. The original Comfrey was obviously really busted from Tournament of Power. This one, not so busted in terms of constructed, and honestly, the original Comfrey is probably better than this card in limited also, but having the upside of being a 1 cost 20k if you satisfy the condition is really, really nice. Even at 3 cost 20k, that's going to get at least a 7 for me. Comfrey is just a really solid rare, and I wouldn't feel too bad about first picking him. Not the greatest, but like it's a pretty solid card that you would definitely take in the first half of a pack. Next up, we have Roselle Wings of Universe 9, 1 cost 5k. When you play this card, choose up to 2 of your opponent's battle cards with energy cost of 3 or less and switch them to rest mode. Has some niche uses. If you guys remember in my World Martial Arts tournament videos, we talked about how good Ranfan could be as a singleton that could win you the game. Note that a lot of your opponent's blockers are 1 cost in this set, so having one of these as a tech choice to be able to go for a game is really nice, and I think it's more usable than some of the more expensive alternatives. It doesn't like cost you any cards from hand or like, you know, 3 or 4 energy, for example. So this is a pretty good way to go for game against mass blockers. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a low 6. I do think it is worth teching in one of these in a lot of your decks. Next up is Oregano, the Web Slinger. 2 costs for a 5k is abysmal, and then also again, most cards in the set are 0.5ks. They're not really 1 cost 10ks. There's not too many extra cards outside of negates. So like, I just don't feel enthusiastic about paying 2 to tap my opponent's energy out. So yeah, I think this card is very, very bad, very poor for draft, and I just would not do it. I think there's so many other energy tapping effects that you could be playing that are better than this guy. So he gets a 3 from me. Next up is Hesop, the Frozen Titan. Is another card that feels like it's probably better in constructed than in limited. You're paying 1 to get a 5k on the board that can't really attack, doesn't replace itself, exposes you to crits early in the game, and then every turn you're going to sink an energy to tap your opponent 1. Again, your opponent's probably just tapping out anyway if you're playing yellow and just trying to go face as fast as possible because they know they're not going to have the energy, so doesn't really do a lot. So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 3, just like I did with Oregano. Next up is Chappell, the Iron Drake, which I think is probably the best one for constructed, and it's probably the best energy tapper for limited as well. It's a 2 cost 15k, which is a good rate, and then on top of it, when your opponent attacks, you get to switch one of their energy to rest mode once per turn. So this forces your opponent to change their play pattern of, because most people are going to swing at their leader to draw a card, see what options they drew into, and then weigh them, and then make a choice, like make a move. Basically, that's the way that most people are going to try to operate. Chappell being on board basically guarantees that what they're going to do is they are going to play the card first, then swing, and if they drew something better, then it's like, oh man, like that stinks. Or more likely, they'll swing and then they'll be down dropping, so like, you know, they'll be playing 3s on turn 4. 4s on turn 5 and things like that. So it's delaying your opponent from hitting these big powerful cards, even if it is just slightly. And I do think that's a very powerful effect, especially if you have a couple of these. You have 2 of these guys on board. It's very, very powerful, and it really stifles the way that your opponent plays the game. So for that reason, I'm going to give Chappell a low 8. I do think it is one of the better uncommons in yellow. Next up, we have Sorrell, the Cottontail Warrior. This is a 1-cost 4K blocker, which is already pretty nice, and then you can pay an extra 1 when this card activates blocker to switch on your opponent's energy to rest mode, which can be nice for the same reasons that we talked about with Chappell. You're basically tapping them out on their turn, under their terms, if you leave one open. And it does protect your life total, so I do think that this is a very good card and one of the better tap-out cards. So I'm going to give Sorrell a 7. Protects your life total and has those niche scenarios of triggering other cards' effects in your hand, and also, again, forcing down drops. Next up, we have Feline Force Hop, which is actually a deceptively good card. It is a 4-cost 15k blocker, which is really not that great for a blocker, but it has, when you play this card, you can switch up to one of your opponent's battle cards and up to one of their energy to rest mode. Yes, the energy is not that great, but the rest mode part of switching a battle card can get through blockers to help you push for game or put on some serious pressure. And then it has activate main, choose one of your opponent's battle cards in rest mode. It can't be switched to active mode until the start of your next main phase. So why this is really good is you play Hop when they have, like, say, like 130k or, like, you know, one big super rare card, and you tap it down and you keep it locked. So basically, Feline Force Hop not only protects your life total, but it says, hey, if you don't have a removal spell for this Hop, you don't ever get that battle card back. Like, it's gone. So that is really powerful to me in that it is a card that can help me go for game, and it can also temporarily remove a threat while also protecting my life total and being at least a relevant stat line attacker. So for that reason, I'm going to give Hop a high 7. I think it is a pretty solid uncommon, and I think this is one that a lot of people will overlook when it comes to playing in limited. Next up, we have Robe, Righteous Supremacy, which is an excellent card. I kind of wish this was an uncommon. It's just a 2-cost 15k, which is good rate, and it does have the tap. It's already a solid card. Like, unlike these other cards that you're seeing that tap energy outside of, like, Chappell and Sorrell, they're bad cards that have an energy tapping effect on it. Roe is a good card with good stats that just happens to have a tap effect on it, and that's what I really want when it comes to these kind of effects. So for that reason, I'm going to give Roe a low 8. This and Chappell feel like the cornerstones of playing yellow. Like, if you see these cards, these are the cards you want to be drafting in yellow. Unfortunately, it's uncommon. Like I said, I really wish this card was common because it would really hammer home this theme instead of forcing us to play so many mediocre cards at the common level. Next up is Lightning, Army of One. She is a 9-cost 35k quadruple strike dual attack. If your opponent has 4 or more energy at the start of your charge phase, if this is the only card in your hand, so basically before you're on your turn, before you draw, if this is the only card in your hand, and your opponent has at least 4 energy, you get to play this card. This card will end the game almost assuredly if you actually get it. So that in itself means that the card is going to get a high score. That said, I think it's very difficult to set up. And it is possible to be foiled, so it's not a guaranteed game winner. I do think this is a card that you can splash relatively easily, so I'm going to give this card a low 9. I do think it is powerful, and I do think it is worth the risk because it should just win you the game as soon as you play it. Excuse me. Okay, so next up, let's talk about Topo. Justice Forsaken is a 5-cost 30k triple strike. When you play this card, choose all of your opponent's battle cards, ignoring barrier, switch them to rest mode, and negate their skills for the turn. And then if it's ever placed in the drop area from a battle area for any reason, you get to draw 2 cards. The draw 2 is largely irrelevant. The best thing about this card is it basically just taps all your opponent's blockers, and it's a huge triple striker. And that's pretty much all you need to say. It's going to get an 8 from me because it's a game ender that is very difficult to block. Next up is Kai, Righteous Supremacy. There's a 1-cost 5k. When you play this card, your opponent has at least 3 or more energy. You get to tap one of them down. Doesn't cantrip, not really that good of a 1-drop. It's pretty mediocre, so yeah, I'm just going to give it a 4. I really just don't like this card that much at all in limited. It has such niche uses. Next up is Giant Ball. It is a 1-cost counterplay. It's basically Crusher Ball, but it can't target cards with barrier, and then you get to draw a card. So I'm really unsure as to why this card was super rare. I'm also really even more confused as the fact that the character on the card is in red, if I believe. So I don't know what this has to do with yellow. Like, this card is just puzzling to me on a lot of different fronts. It's just Crusher Ball with a cantrip that can't hit barrier. That in itself is good enough for me. It does stop most bombs, so Giant Ball gets an 8 from me. Largely just because, again, it's basically a negate with a draw staple to it. So you just take it if you're in yellow and you see it. Next up is Universe 9 Assemble. It's a 2-cost activate main/battle, so you can do this on your opponent's turn. you get to play, you get to draw 2 cards, which is really, really good. And I think a lot of decks will just pick it up because it is a draw 2 in a format where draw power is very hard to get. And then it has the clause if all of your opponent's energy is in rest mode, you get to play a Universe 9 card from your deck with an energy cost of 2 or less. So you're basically going to get your Robe, your Chappell, and things like that. It can get Sorrell, it can get a blocker, things like that. There are a lot of things it can get. The takeaway is that this is a draw 2 for 2 in a format where you really need draw power, and you could do it on your opponent's turn when you know the coast is safe and you don't need your energy for your negates or something like that. So yeah, this card's just really good, just because again it's draw power. We need draw power in this format. It's so hard to come by. It's one of the reasons why I gave Android 18 such a high score. So it gets an 8 from me. Next up we have Justice Crush. It's a 2 cost. Basically it is a Crusher Ball and a Cold Bloodlust for cards that cost 4 or less. Unfortunately, most of the bombs are 5 or higher, and that's kind of really what you want the Crusher Ball on. But this is still pretty good on like a higher end card, like a 3 or a 4 drop, or something with a pretty potent put in play ability. So Justice Crush is really good. It's just paying that 2 for it is kind of harsh. I'm going to give it a low 7 just because it can really stifle a lot of people. It's just I don't really feel super enthusiastic about paying 2 for this. So you really have to set this card up, but it can be game ending. Think of it like a 2 cost negate for things that cost 4 or less. And that's, I think, will help you kind of understand where I'm coming on when I gave that rating. Next up is Ice Lance, which feels borderline useless. You choose one of your opponent's battle cards with energy cost greater than the current energy and negate its skills. When's that happening? Like, seriously, when's that happening? So I'm going to give Ice Lance a 1. I don't see this happening, like, ever. This is puzzling as to why this card is in draft box. And the last card we'll talk about is Triangle Danger Beam. It is a 2 cost, activate battle. Choose one of your opponent's battle cards and negate its skills for the turn. This is basically the replacement for Godstrike Beerus. And Godstrike Beerus was a very narrow card. It was very rarely drafted. It was more like a sideboard card when you knew your opponent was playing a lot of triple strikers or high-end double strikers. And I think Triangle Danger Beam is very much the same. This is going to go around the table and be one of the last picks in a lot of packs. It's worth having 1 or 2 of these in your board. This is definitely not main board material in my opinion, so for that reason I'm going to give it a 4. So join us next time when we talk about the black cards as well as the multicolor cards, specifically like the Destroyer, Destruction God, and Angel Rares, the DARs as they're called. So yeah, that's going to be it for me, guys. As always, like, comment, subscribe if you really enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think about the video series. As always, stay safe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Deuces.